So let's now talk about variables. So we talked about variables in our Principles of Programming session, and we talked about variables as being essentially boxes. They're just boxes that have some information stuffed in them, and that box has a label on it, which gives the box its name, which gives us a clue as to the kind of information that's going to be stored in there. Now, we also mentioned that some programming languages are what's known as strongly typed, which means that you have to, when you create a new variable, you have to not only give it a name, but you also have to say what type it is, and say this is a string or this is an integer or whatever it may be. With Python, you don't need to do that. Python is not a strongly typed language. They are dynamic. Any variables that you create are dynamic, so it will automatically adjust to whatever you put in it. So if you give it a string value, it'll say, oh right, I'm a string now. And as we mentioned, that has advantages and disadvantages, but we'll focus on the advantages because we do like Python here. Now, the way we do that in Python, the way we assign a value to the name of a variable, is we use the assignment operator, and the assignment operator is the equal sign here. Now, what that's basically saying is, let this have a value of this. That's what the assignment operator does, and it can be a bit confusing if you're new to coding, because it's the equal sign, and equals does not mean equals in the way you think it does. Okay, so in Python, a single equals mark like that does not mean equals; it means assignment. So here we've got a variable called name, and it's being assigned the value of Dan. Okay, so it doesn't say is the name equal to Dan. It says let the variable name have the value Dan. Okay, let the variable age have the value 42. Let the variable isTrainer have the value true. Okay, and some nice examples of different variable types here. So that this would be a string, this would be an integer, and this would be a Boolean. Remember, we talked about Booleans as being really useful, where they have a value of either true or false, and they're really useful in conditional logic in particular. So because Python is not strongly typed and instead variables are dynamic, when we create a variable and give it a value, if we then change the value and give it a value of a different type, that variable's type will change along with it. Okay, so let's imagine I create a variable called name, and I first pass into it a string called Dan. Name is currently a string, but if I then say name equals 47, which remember is saying let the value 47 be the value for name, then it'll say, oh, Python say, okay, name is an integer now. And then if you change it to this 87.1 and say, well, no, I'm a float now, I'm a floating point number. And then you can change it back to another string and say, right, okay, I'm a string again. So it will change automatically depending on whatever you pass in. So you need to be aware of that, because things might fall over if you try to do something with a value of a variable that will only work on a certain type. For example, if you wanted to add two numbers together, you can't do that with a string. So it's very important that you're very careful about how you set up your variables and assign them. So you've seen some examples of this already, but let's address this right early in our coding journeys. You've probably seen a lot of use of underscores in some of the things you saw just a moment ago, and also last week in particular. So the reason you're seeing that in a programming language, a space character indicates a separation between instructions, or between an instruction and its value. So if we want to write a name of something, like create the name of a variable, which we can name pretty much whatever we like, and very often that variable name will have more than one word, because single words aren't often enough. We can't use spaces because the Python interpreter will see a space and think you're now talking about something else. Okay, so instead you have to adopt one of two conventions. The first is known as camel case, and camel case is where the first letter of the first word starts with a lowercase, and then you indicate each new word by using an uppercase letter at the start of that word. Okay, so that's camel case. And then there's a thing called snake case. Snake case, you basically just use an underscore where you would have put a space. Okay, now you can use whichever one you prefer, but you should be consistent in whatever you're doing. So whatever you do, don't write a computer program that has both. That's awful. It makes it very unreadable. Generally, though, for Python, snake case is the recommended approach to use. And in fact, it's PEP. I think PEP 8 recommends snake case. So you're free to use either, and I want you to use what you're comfortable with. But generally, certainly in this course, you'll be seeing snake case, and that's, I think, a much more readable one. I used to use camel case years ago, and I think is much more difficult to read personally. But yeah, the Python official recommendation is snake case. So wherever you got a space, or you would have a space in the name of something, then just use an underscore instead.